I was born into an unseen bondage, shackles forged from the grind of habit, the weight of silent acceptance, and the slow crushing certainty that nothing else existed beyond my predetermined fate. The cold metal ones would come later. My designation was Kess, though identity held little meaning when one was mere chattel. This stark truth imprinted itself upon my soul within the Manufactorum caverns beneath Hive Secundus on Mordian Prime, a realm where the air itself was a noxious stew of burnt promethium and human despair, and where the ceiling loomed like the oppressive hand of a slumbering, dead god. Our overseers, perpetually cloaked in the Imperium's self-proclaimed infinite mercy, assured us of our fortune. They had, by their decree, bestowed upon us the sacred gift of purpose, declaring us vital cogs in a mechanism far grander than ourselves. For 17 desolate years, I embraced this fabrication. The cavern stretched into an endless, labyrinthine expanse, meticulously carved from the planet's living rock by countless generations of slaves whose lives culminated with drilling bits still clutched in their lifeless hands. Far above, the Hive City ascended like a malignant growth towards a distant sky. Its billions of citizens nestled in oblivious slumber while we toiled through an eternal night shift, a shift that knew no dawn. Here, time was not measured in hours but in quotas met, not in days but in the number of broken bodies dragged away when their usefulness had been fully expended. My assigned post was Line 7, Section Delta, where my hands, scarred and calloused, moved with a horrifying involuntary grace, assembling bolt shell casings, pick up the metal housing, insert the charge, seal the casing, place it on the conveyor, again. My fingers, smooth from the friction of a million repetitions, danced across the worn surfaces, a mindless ballet of production. The rhythm was meant to be hypnotic, a numbing cadence designed to extinguish all thought. Yet, despite its insidious pull, I had begun to dream. Initially, these dreams manifested as fleeting fragments during the meager 4-hour rest periods granted between shifts. Brief, elusive flashes of an existence wholly alien to my own. An open sky, vast and unmarred. The sensation of wind that carried no trace of industrial rot. Faces sculpted by emotions beyond the dull ache of exhaustion or the sharp stab of fear. These nascent visions disturbed me more profoundly than the rats that gnawed at the discarded corpses in the refuse pits. More than the screams that reverberated from the punishment chambers when a worker's quota fell short. I desperately tried to suppress them. The other slaves, through subtle glances and the quiet shake of a head when the overseers weren't looking, conveyed their unspoken warnings. Dreams were dangerous. Dreams begat hope, and hope in this place inevitably led to the kind of rebellious thoughts that culminated in a bolt shell to the back of the skull. Overseer Vex, a skeletal man whose augmentic eyes clicked with unnerving precision as they focused, stalked our section like a carrion bird. He was forever scrutinizing, seeking any flicker of weakness, defiance, or any sign that we still harbored the memory of our humanity. I had witnessed him execute 17 slaves during my tenure on Line 7. Each time, he would intone the reason with chilling, mechanical clarity. Sabotage, insubordination, failure to meet quota. But the true reason was always brutally simple. They had forgotten their place. Still, the dreams intensified, blossoming into vivid, impossible landscapes. I saw immense spaces bathed in natural light, water that flowed freely in vast, winding channels, rather than through ancient rust-choked pipes. Plants, vibrant and green, grew without the aid of hydroponic systems, their roots drawing sustenance from soil untouched by industrial runoff. Most disquieting of all, I saw people who moved with an unburdened gait, not the shuffling drag of the chronically malnourished. They looked up, not down, and spoke without first calculating the potential for their words to be reported. These impossible dreams bore a name utterly foreign to me, Verdania. It whispered through my sleeping mind, a soft, insistent prayer I could not comprehend. On the day everything changed, these dreams had become so potent that I found myself momentarily halting my work, just long enough to close my eyes and desperately cling to the fleeting sensation of sunlight on my face. It was a lapse in discipline that would cost me more than my life. Slave Kess, the voice of Overseer Vex, cleaved through the industrial din like a freshly honed blade. My eyes snapped open, meeting the cold, mechanical intensity of his augmentics. You appear to be experiencing a malfunction. The other workers on Line 7 remained stoically focused on their tasks, their hands a blur of perfect, practiced rhythm. They had mastered the first, inviolable rule of survival: never be noticed. In that moment of weakness, seduced by impossible visions of a world that could not exist, I had utterly failed. "No malfunction, Overseer," I replied, my voice miraculously steady, despite the cold dread coiling in my gut. A momentary adjustment. To improve efficiency, he subjected me to a long, excruciating stare that felt like a blade tracing my throat. Then, with a slow nod that somehow conveyed more menace than any shouted threat, he spoke. "Continue your duties. I will be monitoring your output personally." As he moved away, I felt the oppressive weight of his attention like a physical burden. But beneath it, deeper still, something else stirred within me. For the first time in 17 years, I found myself wondering not merely what lay beyond the manufactorum, but whether I might, against all odds, actually glimpse it. The thought was so profoundly heretical, it made my hands tremble. Yet once born, it proved impossible to extinguish. The shift dragged on for another 8 interminable hours, but I scarcely registered the passage of time. My hands continued their practiced motions, while my mind embarked on a journey through territories forbidden since birth. I found myself dissecting the guards' routines, their weary habits. I traced the labyrinthine supply tunnels that linked our section to the processing centers. Most dangerously of all, I revisited the hushed stories older slavies sometimes whispered during our brief rest periods, tales of worlds beyond the Hive cities, places where the sky wasn't perpetually obscured by industrial smog, places like Verdania. When the klaxon finally blared, signaling the shift's end, I joined the weary throng moving toward the communal sleeping chambers. But instead of collapsing onto my assigned mat, I lingered in the shadowed corridors, scrutinizing the patterns of movement, the precise placement of surveillance servitors, the subtle gaps in the ostensibly perfect system of control. It was then that I encountered Yorick. He was older than most slaves ever survived to become, his face a weathered map of scars and premature lines. Unlike the others, he did not avert his gaze when I met his eyes. Instead, he studied me with a knowing intensity that suggested he harbored a multitude of secrets. "You have the look," he said quietly, his voice a mere whisper barely audible above the distant hum of machinery. "What look?" I asked, though a deep part of me already knew the answer. "The look of someone who has begun to see beyond the walls." He glanced around, ensuring their conversation remained unobserved, then stepped closer. "It is a dangerous thing, young Kess, but perhaps it is also a necessary one. He knew my name, though we had never exchanged a single word. This realization should have alarmed me, but instead I felt a strange, profound sense of recognition, as if I had been anticipating this very conversation my entire life. "Tell me about Verdania," I urged. His eyes widened slightly, and for a fleeting moment, I thought he might flee. But then, his expression hardened into something resolute, almost defiant. "Not here," he whispered. "Too many ears, too many eyes. But if you truly wish to know, meet me at the water recycling station during the next rest period. Come alone, and tell no one." Then, as abruptly as he had appeared, he was gone, vanishing into the tide of exhausted workers like smoke dissolving in the industrial wind. I spent the remaining hours of my rest period staring at the featureless ceiling of the sleeping chamber, the sounds of my fellow slaves filling the oppressive silence. Some snored, their bodies instinctively claiming what meager respite they could find. Others wept quietly, having long ago learned to muffle even their grief. A few murmured desperate prayers to the Emperor, begging for the strength to endure yet another day of servitude. But my mind was fixed on a single alien concept: choice. It was so foreign to my existence, so utterly outside my framework of understanding, that it felt almost blasphemous. We did what we were told. We worked when commanded. We slept when permitted. Our lives were dictated by schedules, by quotas, by the relentless, unyielding rhythm of industrial necessity. Yet somehow, in the delicate space between one heartbeat and the next, I had stumbled upon the horrifying, exhilarating truth that alternatives might exist. When the appointed time arrived, I navigated the darkened corridors toward the water recycling station. The path led me through forgotten sections of the manufactorum, past machinery so ancient its original purpose had long since been lost to the grinding gears of the Imperium. I passed through vast chambers where the walls wept with condensation, tears that might once have been human. Jorik was waiting for me beside a massive filtration tank, his figure barely discernible in the dim emergency lighting. In the shadows, he appeared older, more fragile, yet somehow more real, more authentic than any person I had ever encountered. "You came," he said, and I detected a flicker of surprise in his voice. "You knew I would." "I hoped," he admitted, a grim smile touching his lips. "Hope is all we have left down here, though they strive to take even that from us." He gestured for me to sit beside him on a section of pipe that jutted from the wall. "What I am about to tell you may well destroy you, Kess, or it may save you. I no longer know the difference." "Tell me," I urged. He remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the confines of our prison. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the accumulated grief of decades. "I was not always a slave," he began, his voice barely a murmur. "Once long ago, I walked beneath an open sky. I felt rain on my face that had fallen from natural clouds, not from the recycling systems of an industrial hive. I knew the sensation of grass beneath my feet, of wind that carried the scent of growing things, not the stench of decay. That is impossible," I countered, though my heart was pounding furiously. "There are only the hive cities, only the manufactorums and processing centers, and endless corridors of service and production." "Is it?" He turned to face me directly, his gaze piercing. "Think, Kess. What do you truly know of the world beyond these walls? What have you seen with your own eyes, rather than simply accepted, because it is what you have been told?" The question struck me with the force of a physical blow. I realized, with sickening clarity, that everything I believed about existence outside the manufactorum was built on mere assumptions, on the casual pronouncements of overseers, on the unexamined acceptance that this was all there was. "I know nothing," I admitted, the words tasting of ash. "Exactly," he replied, his voice growing softer, yet far more dangerous. "And in that ignorance they have imprisoned us more effectively than any chain ever could. But some of us remember. Some of us carry the knowledge of what was taken from us." "What was taken?" I whispered. "Everything," he stated, the word falling between us like a heavy stone into still water. "Our homes, our families, our freedom, our very identities as human beings, rather than mere units of production." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Verdania exists, Kess. It is a world of towering forests and rushing rivers, of cities built for beauty rather than brutal efficiency. A place where human beings live as something more than slaves or masters. I was born there before the imperial tithe collectors came, before they decided that our world's greatest resource was not its minerals or its strategic position, but its people." The words hit me like hammer blows, shattering the foundations of everything I had been taught. The glory of service, the honor of contributing to the Imperium's grand design, it all began to crumble like poorly mixed concrete. "How many of us are there?" I asked. "How many remember?" "Fewer," he said, his gaze distant. "Each year, the older slaves die, and the younger ones are born into the system without ever knowing anything else existed. Soon, all memory of the outer worlds will be lost, and we will become exactly what they want us to be, willing participants in our own enslavement." "But you remembered," I insisted. "You kept the knowledge alive." "I did," he conceded, a bitter edge to his voice. "But what good has it done? I have spent 30 years in these caverns, watching friends die, watching hope slowly drain away like water through cracked stone. Memory without action is just another form of torture." There was an undertone in his voice, beneath the resignation, that made me look at him more carefully. A spark of something that might have been preparation. "You are planning something," I said. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the tattered remains of his work coveralls and withdrew something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a small piece of metal, meticulously worked into the delicate shape of a leaf. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each vein and curve rendered with loving, impossible detail. But more than its sheer beauty, it was what the object represented that made my hands tremble. It was proof. Proof that somewhere in the vast, unforgiving galaxy, people still created things for reasons other than efficiency or function. They made beauty. They made art. They made objects that served no purpose except to remind the observer that there was more to existence than mere survival. "Where did you get this?" I whispered, awestruck. "I made it," he replied, his voice soft. "From scraps of metal stolen over the course of years. It is my memory of Verdania given form, my reminder that I was once more than this." He placed the leaf into my palm, and it felt warm against my skin, despite the chill air of the recycling station. "But memory alone is not enough. Not anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I mean that tomorrow, during the shift change, there will be an opportunity. The transport that brings raw materials from the upper levels will be lightly guarded. Its route takes it through sections of the complex where surveillance is minimal, for perhaps 10 minutes. There will be a chance. A chance for what? The word hung between us like an explosive device primed to detonate. Escape. It was not a concept that belonged in our vocabulary. It was not something we were permitted to even consider. Yet here it was, offered to me like a perilous gift that might destroy us both. It is impossible, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were lies. Not impossible, he corrected, his eyes fixed on mine. Just incredibly dangerous, perhaps. But I would rather die attempting to reclaim my humanity than continue existing as a mere component in someone else's machine. He stood, his movements stiff with age and accumulated damage. I will not ask you to come with me, Kess. The choice must be yours alone. But if you decide to try, meet me at Loading Bay 7 tomorrow when the shift klaxon sounds. He turned to leave, then paused, his gaunt figure silhouetted against the dim lights. And if you choose not to come, forget this conversation ever happened. Forget the leaf. Forget Verdania. Return to your station and live whatever life they allow you. It may not be freedom, but it is survival. And survival is not without its own value. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the impossible gift in my palm and a decision that would define everything that came after. I returned to my sleeping mat, but true rest was impossible. The metallic leaf seemed to burn against my skin where I had hidden it beneath my coveralls. Every time I closed my eyes, visions of open sky and growing things warred with the stark, accusing faces of executed slaves, their eyes empty and hollow. Around me, my fellow workers slept the deep, heavy sleep of the utterly exhausted, their bodies claiming what little reprieve they could before the next grueling shift began. They looked so peaceful in the darkness, temporarily freed from the invisible weight of their chains. Part of me envied them. They had never been burdened with choice. They had never been forced to confront the terrifying possibility that their lives might be something other than what they were. But another part of me, the part that had steadily grown stronger since the dreams first began, looked upon them with something akin to pity. They were asleep in more ways than one, and I was no longer certain that ignorance was truly a blessing. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Each hour felt like a day, each minute an eternity of waiting. When the klaxon finally blared, signaling the beginning of the next work period, I rose with the others and made my way toward Line 7. But instead of the mindless efficiency that usually characterized our movements, I found myself studying everything with new, calculating eyes. The guards who herded us through the corridors were no longer the invincible enforcers I had always believed them to be. They were tired men with aging equipment, going through motions they had repeated countless times. The surveillance servitors that tracked our movements had blind spots, subtle gaps in their coverage that a careful observer might exploit. The very size and complexity of the manufactorum, which had once seemed like irrefutable proof of our eternal imprisonment, now revealed itself as a vast maze riddled with hidden passages and forgotten chambers. For the first time in my life, I began to perceive the system not as an immutable law of nature, but as something constructed by human beings, and what humans had built, other humans might find ways to circumvent. At my station, I resumed the familiar motions of assembling bolt shell casings, but my mind was miles away, grappling with Yorick's words, the world he had described, and the terrifying choice that lay before me like an abyss. Every few minutes, I would touch the hidden leaf through the coarse fabric of my coveralls, feeling its faint warmth, and remembering that beauty was indeed possible. Overseer Vex made his customary rounds, his augmentic eyes clicking as they focused on each worker in turn. When he reached my station, he paused longer than usual, his mechanical gaze dissecting my movements with analytical precision. "Your efficiency has improved, Slave Kess," he observed, a chilling neutrality in his voice. "Yesterday's correction appears to have been effective." "Yes, Overseer," I replied, my voice steady. "I am grateful for your guidance." "Good. The Imperium rewards those who learn from their mistakes." He began to move to the next station, then abruptly stopped. "However, I sense something different about you today. A quality I cannot quite define." My blood ran to ice, but I kept my hands moving in their practiced rhythm. "I do not understand, Overseer. Perhaps it is nothing, but I have learned to trust my instincts when it comes to identifying potential problems." His augmentic eyes whirred softly as they adjusted focus. "I will be watching you closely, Slave Kess. Very closely indeed." As he moved away, I felt the oppressive weight of his attention like a physical thing pressing down on my shoulders. But rather than crushing me, it seemed to solidify my resolve. If I was already under suspicion, then I had little left to lose. The choice was no longer between safety and risk, but between a certain slow death and the possibility of something more. The shift dragged on with unbearable slowness. Each hour felt like a day, each minute an eternity of waiting. Around me, my fellow slaves continued their work with mechanical precision, utterly unaware that one among them was preparing to shatter the only world they had ever known. As the end of shift approached, I found myself studying their faces more carefully than ever before. There was Mira, who worked the station next to mine, humming quietly to herself as she assembled detonator circuits with practiced ease. Old Henrik, whose hacking cough had worsened for months, yet continued working because the alternative was the corpse pit. Young Tam, barely 16, who still sometimes cried in his sleep for parents he could barely remember. What would happen to them if I succeeded? What would happen if I failed? For the first time, I began to grasp the true weight of choice. It was not just my own life I was risking, but the delicate balance of resignation that kept all of us alive. But then I thought of the leaf hidden against my skin, of Jorik's description of Verdania, of the dreams that had shown me glimpses of what human existence might become. And I realized that some risks were worth taking, not despite the cost, but precisely because of it. When the shift klaxon finally sounded, I joined the weary stream of workers moving toward the dormitories. But as we passed the junction that led to Loading Bay 7, I quietly detached myself from the group and slipped into the deep shadows of a maintenance alcove. My heart pounded so loudly, I was certain the surveillance servitors would detect it. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow potentially concealed a guard or an informant. But slowly, carefully, I made my way through passages I had never traveled before, following half-remembered directions toward a rendezvous that might be the last decision I would ever make. Loading Bay 7 was a cavernous space, filled with massive industrial equipment and the constant rumble of heavy machinery. Colossal conveyor systems moved raw materials from the transport vehicles to processing centers deeper within the complex. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of chemical solvents. I found Yorick, waiting beside a towering stack of metal ingots, his figure almost swallowed by the industrial gloom. When he saw me, something in his expression shifted from grim resignation to a fragile flicker of hope. "You came," he said. "I came. Do you understand what this means? what we are about to attempt. I understand that I cannot continue living as I have, I replied, my voice steady. Beyond that, I understand very little. He nodded slowly. Perhaps that is enough. Understanding can be a burden, and we will have enough of those to carry. As if summoned by his words, the resonant sound of approaching machinery echoed through the loading bay. A massive transport vehicle rounded the corner, its treads grinding against the rockreat floor as it maneuvered toward the unloading station. Behind it came two more vehicles, equally immense, laden with materials from the upper levels of the Hive. There, Lorik whispered, pointing toward the third transport. Its cargo bay is only half full, and the guards are tired from a double shift. When it begins to move toward the exit tunnel, we will have perhaps 60 seconds to reach it and find concealment among the cargo containers. And then we pray to whatever gods might still listen to slaves, and we hope that freedom is worth the price we will pay for it. The transport completed its unloading cycle and began to turn toward the exit tunnel. For a moment, I hesitated. This was the point of no return. The exact moment I would transform from a productive unit of the shedding the mantle of the Imperium's property, he transformed into something new. A fugitive, a rebel, a human being asserting his right to choose. Then Jorik began to run, his aged legs, fueled by a sudden, desperate resolve, propelling him across the vast loading bay with unexpected agility. And without a moment for doubt or reconsideration, I instinctively mirrored his flight. The subsequent moments dissolved into a chaotic rush of frantic movement and pounding pulses. We lunged for the transport just as its engines began to whine with accelerating power, scrambling onto its rear platform. We wedged ourselves amongst massive cargo containers, our bodies flattened against the cold metal, precisely as the vehicle plunged into the gaping maw of the exit tunnel. The familiar, oppressive loading bay vanished behind us, swallowed by an encroaching darkness. Before us lay a revelation I had only ever dared to dream of. The outside world, a realm of uncharted unknowns, pregnant with possibilities stretching far beyond the confining walls of our incarceration. As the transport relentlessly ascended, winding through the labyrinthine tunnel system towards the Hive's higher surface levels, I pressed my face into a narrow crevice between the containers. My breath hitched, suspended in awe at my first glimpse of true light. Not the harsh, sterile glow of the manufactorums, but an alien, vibrant radiance that hinted at boundless expanses, chambers vaster than anything I could have ever conceived. Jorik, I barely managed to whisper, is that what I imagine it to be? He shifted, drawing close to peer through the same opening, and I watched, captivated, as tears traced shimmering paths down his deeply lined, weathered face. Sunlight, he articulated, his voice thick with emotion. 30 years. After 3 decades of confinement, I am seeing the sun. Our ascent continued, carrying us through strata of the Hive I had never even known existed. We glided past bustling residential districts, where ordinary citizens dwelled in conditions that, to my eyes, appeared unbelievably lavish compared to our dank subterranean cells. Then came vibrant commercial sectors, where people moved with an unburdened ease, freely choosing their own trajectories instead of rigidly adhering to preordained paths. Beyond those lay the austere administrative centers, where unseen officials wielded immense power, making decisions that dictated the fates of millions, seemingly oblivious to the human cost of their decrees. And then, defying all logic and possibility, we broke free, emerging onto the very surface of the world itself. I had conjured visions of an open sky in my dreams, yet the overwhelming reality of it nearly stole my breath, threatening to pull me into unconsciousness. The sheer boundless immensity of it all, the feeling of space unfurling in every conceivable direction, devoid of walls, ceilings, or any discernible boundaries. Above, the sky stretched out in a muted, nameless shade of pale gray, and on the distant horizon, an impossibly brilliant orb blazed. The sun, Yorick clarified, observing my profound bewilderment. The colossal star that bathes this world in light and warmth. They kept us interred beneath countless tons of rockcrete and steel, ensuring you would never witness its glory. The transport traversed what seemed to be an expansive industrial zone, yet even within this familiar landscape of industry, I encountered phenomena that shattered every preconceived notion I held about existence. Structures stood tall, clearly designed for functions far beyond mere production. Vehicles glided by, conveying human beings rather than just raw materials or finished goods. But most astonishingly, the people themselves moved with a vitality I had never witnessed, no longer possessing the dragging, shuffling gait born of ceaseless exhaustion. Their gazes were lifted, not fixed perpetually on the ground, but upward, towards the vast, open sky. Overwhelmed, I murmured, "Where are we headed?" "Away from this place, Führer," he replied. "As far as these transports journey before they loop back to the loading bays." He paused, his eyes meticulously scanning the alien landscape unfolding before us. "There's a spaceport," he continued, "situated on the distant outskirts of the Hive. Vessels arrive and depart, ferrying both freight and travelers to countless other worlds. If we can reach it, if we can secure passage by some means, then perhaps, just perhaps, we might eventually find our way to Verdania. And if not," he concluded, a quiet determination in his voice, "then at least we will have had this much. We will have seen the sky. We will have remembered what it truly feels like to be human." The journey to the spaceport spanned several grueling hours, a period during which I grappled with more profound wonder and paralyzing terror than in all the preceding years of my existence combined. Wonder blossomed at the monumental scale and intricate complexity of the world unspooling beyond the confines of the manufactorums. Terror gnawed at me with the chilling realization that we were utterly severed from all that was familiar, now mere fugitives adrift in an utterly incomprehensible landscape. As the transport at last began its deceleration, drawing closer to what resolved into a vast complex of sprawling landing platforms and colossal warehouse facilities, Jorik and I braced ourselves to disembark. Our strategy extended no further than simply reaching the spaceport itself. We possessed no resources beyond the raw, burning ember of our determination. No practical skills, save those honed for the monotonous tasks of industrial assembly. Yet we harbored something more, an intangible quality the overseers had relentlessly sought to eradicate, but had never quite managed to extinguish entirely. We had hope. The transport finally halted at a cargo transfer station, a periphery point on the vast spaceport complex. While workers busied themselves with the systematic unloading of the very containers that had served as our makeshift sanctuary, we deftly melted away, slipping into the bewildering labyrinth of buildings and landing platforms that stretched endlessly into the horizon. And then, for the first time in either of our lives, the truth slammed into me. We were free. The sheer weight of that realization struck me with the force of a physical impact. Free. The word itself had been utterly devoid of context in my previous existence, lacking any conceptual framework for comprehension. But here, As we walked through these unfamiliar corridors, where no omnipresent overseer scrutinized our every move, where no relentless quotas dictated our worth, where no blaring klaxons delineated the boundaries of our days, I began to grasp the profound message Yorick had so desperately tried to convey. We were no longer mere chattel. We were human beings, endowed with the terrifying and exhilarating power to make our own choices, even if those choices ultimately steered us towards our own demise. The spaceport itself was a sprawling metropolis, a vibrant nexus teeming with individuals from every corner of the Imperium. Merchants haggled, pilgrims journeyed, soldiers patrolled, and administrators bustled, all moving with the innate, unburdened freedom of those who had never tasted the bitter chains of true servitude. Amidst this bustling tapestry, Jorik and I were mere ghosts, perfectly invisible, two more indistinct figures in standard work coveralls, utterly unremarkable, blending seamlessly into the background to avoid any unwanted scrutiny. However, this newfound freedom arrived with an unexpected cost, one I had entirely failed to anticipate. Stripped of the rigid structure of the manufacturum, divested of the familiar cadence of shifts, quotas, and assigned duties, I found myself paralyzed, utterly overwhelmed by the sheer, dizzying array of choices now laid before us. Where do we go? What actions should we take? How do free people navigate such decisions? Jorik, drawing upon the fragmented echoes of a life lived before his enslavement, guided us through the intricate complex, steering towards the passenger terminals. His rudimentary plan revolved around securing passage to Verdania. Yet, the deeper we ventured into the spaceport's bustling heart, the starker it became that this endeavor would prove far more formidable than either of us had initially conceived. The colossal ships that bridged worlds demanded not only payment, but also extensive documentation and official endorsements for their passenger manifests. We possessed none of these crucial prerequisites. We were, in essence, escaped slaves, bereft of any identity beyond our assigned service numbers, and utterly without currency, save for the potent, fragile hope that had propelled us this far. We need to secure employment, Yorick stated, his voice low, as we sought temporary refuge in a discreet maintenance alcove nestled between two sprawling terminals. Legitimate, paid work, something that will furnish us with the necessary resources to book passage without suspicion. But what kind of honest labor could two escaped slaves possibly find in a spaceport? I countered, the question laced with a profound skepticism. The very same kind of work that free individuals undertake, he retorted, his gaze unwavering. We are no longer slaves, Kess. We must actively shed that mindset. His words, when spoken, held an almost deceptive simplicity. The ensuing reality, however, proved infinitely more intricate. I was rapidly discovering that freedom transcended the mere absence of physical chains. It was a profound skill, one demanding diligent development and a radical reorientation of thought. After 17 years of having every single decision meticulously made for us, the daunting prospect of charting our own course was a potent cocktail of exhilarating possibility and paralyzing dread. We spent the ensuing days painstakingly learning to navigate the treacherous currents of this alien world. We secured temporary employment, arduous workloading and unloading cargo, tasks that mercifully demanded no official documentation and offered meager payment in small denominations of imperial currency. Our nights were spent huddled in the dim recesses of maintenance areas and forgotten storage compartments. Our meals, scavenged scraps from the bustling food vendors catering to the spaceport's authorized clientele. It was an existence marked by hardship, yet it was undeniably ours. For the very first time in our lives, the strenuous labor we performed served our own burgeoning ambitions, rather than the dictates of distant, unseen masters. The profound exhaustion that claimed us at the close of each day felt earned, not imposed. Even our gnawing hunger held a peculiar flavor of freedom, a direct consequence of our own choices, rather than the calculated, soul-crushing rationing enforced by our captors. But beneath these nascent joys of liberation, an insidious truth always lingered. We were existing on borrowed time. Escaped slaves represented valuable imperial property, and the Imperium was notoriously unforgiving of any perceived theft of its resources. Inevitably, our absence would be noted. Inevitably, the relentless hunt would commence. On our 7th precarious day inhabiting the spaceport, that anticipated inevitability materialized with chilling precision. I was engaged in a loading shift on Platform 12 when my eyes caught sight of them. 3 ominous figures, clad in the somber gray uniforms of Manufacturum security, threaded their way through the throng with the measured, predatory patience of seasoned hunters. Though their data slates displayed images I couldn't discern clearly, their grim purpose was unmistakably evident. They were hunting for us. I located Yorick at his assigned station, and with a subtle, prearranged gesture, a silent language we had forged during our fleeting tenure as free men, I conveyed the dire warning. Without uttering a single word, we instantly abandoned our posts and deftly navigated our way towards the emergency exits, passages that had quickly become both our potential escape conduits and our clandestine refuges. However, as we hastened through the utilitarian service, corridors winding beneath the grand passenger terminals, a grim realization settled upon us. Our pursuers had chillingly anticipated our every move, preemptively blocking our egress. More security personnel were strategically deployed at the exits, their calculated positions designed to ruthlessly sever any attempt at flight. They knew we would converge here, Yorick observed, his voice hushed as we sought desperate cover in the deep shadows of a maintenance alcove. They grasped the psychology of escaped slaves far better than we comprehend the nuances of freedom. Then what course of action do we take? I implored, a tremor in my voice. We make a choice they will utterly fail to foresee, he declared, his tone resonating with an unnerving calm that defied the perilous circumstances. We cease our flight, and we begin to fight. Fighting? I exclaimed, the word hollow with disbelief. We are bereft of weapons, devoid of combat training, utterly without resources. What hope do 2 escaped slaves possess against the formidable security apparatus of the Imperium? We can recall the lessons ingrained in us within the Manufacturums, he asserted, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. He reached into the pocket of his coveralls, producing the delicate metal leaf he had first revealed to me days prior. We can forge something they cannot possibly control. I remained utterly bewildered by his meaning, until he began to move through the cluttered maintenance area with a newfound, intense purpose. A focused drive I had never before witnessed in him. He was no longer fleeing, no longer seeking concealment. He was working, his hands moving with the same practiced efficiency and meticulous precision he had once applied to the mundane tasks of industrial assembly. But instead of fabricating components for the Imperium's war machine, he was now fashioning something profoundly different. Utilizing scraps of metal and discarded wire, scavenged from the defunct maintenance equipment surrounding us, he meticulously began to construct a device. Its true purpose dawned on me only as it neared completion, a rudimentary yet functional transmitter, capable of broadcasting its signal across the entirety of the spaceport's vast communication networks. "What precisely are you doing?" I questioned, my voice filled with apprehension. "I am presenting them with a choice," he responded, his gaze fixed. "The very same choice they inadvertently offered us all those years ago, though they remained utterly blind to it." He activated the crude device, and suddenly his voice, amplified and resonating, began to reverberate through the vast public address systems of the entire spaceport. "Citizens of the Imperium," he began, his opening words carrying with profound clarity across bustling platforms and echoing through cavernous terminals, piercing the ears of thousands of unsuspecting travelers, diligent workers, and stern officials. "You are now listening to the voice of a slave. Not merely a former slave, nor an escaped slave, but a living, breathing human being forcibly torn from his home and condemned to toil in the perpetual darkness beneath your gleaming cities." Around us, the unmistakable sounds of security forces drawing closer intensified. The scuff of boots, the muffled thud of equipment. "Yet," Jorek continued, his voice unwavering, infused with a calm, unyielding determination, "for 3 decades, I meticulously assembled components for the very weapons destined to conquer other worlds, to wrench other people from their hearths, to reduce them to the same bondage I was forced to endure. I performed this labor because I was indoctrinated to believe it served a greater good, because I was assured my suffering held profound meaning within the grand tapestry of the Imperium's glory." His voice, now robust and imbued with an undeniable certainty, soared across the spaceport like a poignant anthem of defiance. "But I have reawakened a truth they desperately attempted to steal from us. I have remembered that human beings are not mere cogs in a colossal machine. We are not expendable resources to be consumed in service of distant, indifferent masters. We are individuals, inherently possessed of the right to choose our own destiny, even if that choice ultimately leads to our own destruction." The security forces were now alarmingly close. I could clearly discern the beams of their tactical lights dancing through the corridors, hear the distinct thud of their boots on the metallic flooring. Yet somehow their approaching presence no longer seemed inherently menacing. They were, I realized, merely people performing a job, adhering to orders, serving a system that had, in its own insidious way, reduced us all to mere functions, rather than acknowledging us as complex, sentient human beings. "Thousands of slaves toil in the crushing darkness beneath this very hive," Jorek continued, his voice resonating with a renewed urgency. "Millions more across the vast expanse of the Imperium. People who have, over time, forgotten the very essence of their inherent freedom, who have, through relentless indoctrination, accepted that their lives are merely property belonging to others. But freedom," he declared with conviction, "is not a thing that can be permanently seized. It can only be forgotten, and what is forgotten can, by sheer force of will, always be remembered, always be recovered." He turned his gaze to me then, his eyes alight with a fierce, burning luminescence I had never before witnessed. "Tell them about Verdania," he urged. And in that instant, a profound understanding washed over me. He was not merely asking me to speak, but to bear sacred witness, to become the living vessel for the memory of what we had rediscovered, to carry its torch forward, even if neither of us were destined to survive to see its ultimate fulfillment. I accepted the crudely fashioned transmitter from his grasp, feeling the immense weight of that choice settle upon my shoulders like a mantle of newly forged armor. "Verdania," I began, my voice astonishingly remaining steady despite the ever closer thud of approaching footsteps, is a world where its inhabitants cultivate their sustenance from soil that has never been tainted by the toxic runoff of industry. It is a realm where children revel in the warmth of natural sunlight rather than toiling away in perpetual darkness, where art is born of pure aesthetic beauty, not dictated by cold, calculating efficiency, where human beings are cherished for their intrinsic humanity, not merely for their productive output. The security forces had at last cornered us. I could distinctly see their weapons raised, gleaming ominously, their faces obscured by the impersonal, reflective surfaces of their tactical visors. Yet beyond the intimidating facade, I discerned something more profound. Through faint reflections in those visors, I caught glimpses of eyes that betrayed something far deeper than mere mechanical obedience. They were listening, truly listening. Some of you have glimpsed such worlds, I pressed on, my voice now directed not just at the armed security detail, but at every soul within the broadcast's reach. Some of you still carry the visceral memory of what it truly feels like to be free. That memory is not irrevocably lost, not entirely forgotten, nor utterly obliterated by the insidious weight of chains, the tyranny of quotas, or the soul-crushing burden of servitude. It slumbers within each of us, dormant, patiently awaiting its reclamation. The lead security officer advanced, his weapon locked squarely on my chest. "Surrender now," he commanded, his voice clipped and authoritative, "and your termination will be swift." Yet beneath the veneer of command, his tone held an unexpected tremor, an unmistakable note of uncertainty. Beyond the pronouncements of duty, I perceived a silent, profound question, posed not just to us, but to himself. "I will not surrender," I declared, my resolve hardening, not out of some sudden surge of bravery, but because surrender signifies a willing return to the darkness. And I have now witnessed too much light to ever accept that fate willingly. Yorick stepped closer, positioning himself beside me, his deeply etched face serene with a quiet, profound acceptance. "We choose to die as human beings," he affirmed, his voice resonating with conviction, "rather than continue to exist as mere property." For a prolonged, agonizing moment, the corridor was consumed by an almost sacred silence, broken only by the low hum of machinery and the distant, muffled echoes of the spaceport's ceaseless activity. The security officer's weapon remained pointed directly at us, but he did not discharge it. His fellow officers, a silent phalanx, awaited orders that, inexplicably, never came. Then, in a gesture that defied all logic and expectation, the man slowly lowered his weapon. "I remember Verdania," he uttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His words descended between us like stones dropped into placid water, sending ripples of profound impact outward through the ranks of the assembled security forces. I witnessed flickers of recognition behind other visors, saw weapons subtly waver as hands, conditioned to kill without question, suddenly recalled the unfamiliar, liberating sensation of choosing. "Sergeant Kane," one of the other officers questioned, his voice strained with palpable confusion. "Your orders, sir?" The man who had invoked Verdania, Sergeant Kane, stood suspended in an excruciating limbo between the stark demands of duty and the awakening power of memory. His weapon now hung limp at his side, seemingly forgotten, while his augment eye flickered softly, diligently processing data that his reawakening human mind was desperately struggling to reconcile. "I was born there," he finally whispered, his words barely audible above the omnipresent mechanical hum of the spaceport. "Before the tithe collectors arrived, before they unilaterally decided our world was more valuable for its people than for its resources," another officer, noticeably younger, and his face still entirely obscured by his visor, stepped forward, his posture rigid. "Sergeant, we have our clear orders. These individuals are escaped Imperial property. They must be either returned to their designated function or immediately terminated." But Kane was no longer attuned to the cold, unyielding dictates of Imperial doctrine. He was listening to a deeper current, an ancient truth that had lain buried beneath decades of rigorous conditioning and unquestioning obedience. "Do you truly know what we cultivated on Verdania?" he inquired, his voice steadily gaining strength, a profound earnestness now replacing his initial whisper. Not the bland, engineered corpse starch or synthetic nutrients, but real food, fruits and vegetables that burst with the very essence of sunshine and rain. My family owned an orchard there, apple trees planted by my great-grandfather that would have sustained my own children had I ever been permitted to have any. The young officer's weapon remained pointed steadily, yet I could discern a subtle, unsettling uncertainty in the set of his shoulders. "The past is irrelevant, Sergeant. We serve the Emperor's will now." "Whose will?" Kane retorted, spinning to confront his subordinate. I watched, mesmerized, as tears carved glistening paths down his scarred cheeks. The Emperor who ruthlessly demands that human beings be reduced to mere numbers in a production quota. The Emperor who callously tears children from their families to satiate the endless, rapacious hunger of his war machine. Or the Emperor we were indoctrinated to worship. The one who supposedly cherishes human dignity and upholds the sacred nature of imperial citizenship. His searing questions hung in the charged air, resonating like a series of potent accusations. Around us, more security personnel continued to arrive, but instead of amplifying the sense of immediate threat, their growing presence seemed only to intensify the profound weight of Kane's words. These were no longer just faceless enforcers of imperial will. They were individuals, many of whom undoubtedly carried their own suppressed memories of loss, their own buried, nascent understanding of what had been unjustly stripped from them. Yorick advanced slowly, his movements meticulously deliberate, designed to avoid any sudden action that might provoke a violent reaction. "How many among you recall worlds that no longer exist in their original, vibrant forms?" he inquired, his voice gentle but piercing. "How many of you bear the burden of families you will never again embrace, simply because your duty compels you to stand here, enforcing a system that treats all human beings as mere resources to be perpetually consumed?" "Silence," the young officer commanded, but his voice, though attempting authority, was noticeably devoid of true conviction. "You are common criminals, escaped slaves, attempting to corrupt loyal imperial servants with seditious propaganda." "Are we?" I found myself interjecting, the words spilling forth from a wellspring deeper than conscious thought. "Or are we simply people who utterly refuse to accept that this curtailed existence is all we are permitted to be?" I reached into my coveralls, drawing out the small, intricately worked metal leaf Yorick had entrusted to me, holding it aloft for all to see its delicate craftsmanship. "This," I explained, "was fashioned by a slave, meticulously crafted during the precious few stolen minutes between grueling shifts, using scraps of metal that would otherwise have been melted down and recycled into instruments of war. It serves no practical function, save for one profound purpose: to remind us that beauty remains possible, that human beings are inherently capable of creating something far beyond the cold, oppressive machinery of their own subjugation." Despite their rigorous training, several of the security officers instinctively edged closer, drawn by an undeniable current of curiosity. In the stark, unforgiving illumination of the corridor, the delicate metal leaf seemed to emanate its own soft, internal luminescence. "It's merely a piece of scrap metal," the young officer muttered, yet his voice carried a faint, telltale resonance, suggesting a nascent understanding of its deeper, symbolic significance. "No," Kane gently corrected. "It is irrefutable proof that we are inherently more than what they relentlessly tell us we are." The tense standoff endured for several more protracted minutes, but a fundamental, irreversible shift had occurred. The once clear, unyielding divisions between captor and captive, between the ironclad rule of law and the desperate cry of rebellion, had become profoundly blurred by the sudden, potent introduction of a third unseen element: memory. The collective recollection of what had been cruelly lost, what had been unjustly taken, and the electrifying possibility of what might yet be reclaimed, if only enough people dared to remember. It was Kane who decisively shattered the impasse. "Lower your weapons," he commanded, his voice now imbued with an unshakable authority. "Sergeant, I cannot comply with that order," the young officer immediately responded. "Protocol demands—" "Protocol can burn in the warp," Kane snapped, his patience reaching its abrupt end. "I am issuing a direct command. Lower your weapons and stand down." One by one, the security forces, in a truly astonishing display, complied. Not solely because they had been explicitly ordered to, but because they had been profoundly reminded of a truth they had, for too long, forgotten. They were not mere machines, programmed for unquestioning compliance. They were human beings, capable of exercising choice, even choices that directly contradicted years of ingrained training. "What unfolds now?" I murmured, my voice tinged with a cautious optimism. Kane regarded me for a long, searching moment, his expression a fleeting tableau of conflicting emotions: confusion, righteous anger, and something nascent that might have been hope. "Now," he finally stated, his gaze distant, "we discover if the Imperium can endure the revelation that its populace is capable of choosing their own destiny." He then activated his comm unit, speaking into it with a new, quiet authority. "Control, this is Security Team 7. The escaped slaves have been located, but the situation mandates special handling. I am requesting an immediate conference with the spaceport administrator." The automated reply crackled back. "Acknowledged, Sergeant Kane. Is the threat contained?" Kane's eyes swept over Yorick and me, then lingered on his fellow officers, finally resting upon the small metal leaf that still seemed to pulse with a faint, inner glow in my open palm. "The threat is contained," he responded, his voice even. "However, the situation is considerably more complex than initially reported." What transpired next was utterly unlike anything I had ever conceived possible within the rigid, unyielding hierarchy of Imperial administration. Instead of facing summary execution or an immediate, brutal return to bondage, Jorik and I found ourselves being escorted, with an almost surreal formality, into a conference room nestled deep within the spaceport's administrative complex. We were not led in as prisoners, but as something. The system itself had no established protocol for handling. Human beings asserting their fundamental right to be acknowledged and treated as such. The spaceport administrator, a gaunt woman with perpetually tired eyes and the deeply etched, weary expression of someone who had devoted decades to navigating the Byzantine labyrinth of imperial bureaucracy, awaited us. When we were brought before her, She scrutinized us with the cold, clinical detachment of an individual accustomed to dispassionately processing abstract problems, rather than engaging with living, breathing people. "You are identified as escaped slaves from Manufacturum Complex 7, she recited, consulting her data slate with crisp efficiency. "Imperial property, each valued at approximately 3,000 thrones, specialized in munitions assembly, with 17 and 30 years of training, respectively." "We are human beings," Yorick replied, his statement simple, yet undeniably potent. "Human beings who are also imperial property under Codex Administratum, Classification 77 Alpha," she countered, her voice retaining its mechanical precision. "Your unauthorized departure from your assigned function constitutes theft of imperial resources, punishable by immediate termination." She articulated the words with flawless, robotic cadence, yet I noted that her eyes deliberately avoided meeting ours as she spoke. Beneath the official, unfeeling language, I detected the faint presence of someone who deeply understood the profound, insidious weight of the very mandates she was compelled to enforce. Kane stepped forward. "Administrator Chen, I respectfully request permission to submit an alternative assessment of the current situation." She regarded him with a flicker of surprise. "Sergeant, the protocol for handling escaped slaves is unequivocally defined. There is no alternative assessment required." "With all due respect, Administrator," Kane persisted, his tone firm but deferential, "I believe there are factors present that fall entirely outside the parameters of normal protocol." "Explain," she ordered, her voice sharp with impatience. What followed was one of the most extraordinary and unexpected conversations I would ever witness. A clash between the rigid dogma of the Imperium and the reawakening spirit of humanity. The most extraordinary conversation I had ever borne witness to. Kin, leveraging his dual perspective as both an Imperial security officer and a human being who remembered freedom, skillfully reframed our volatile confrontation in the maintenance corridors. He presented our shared experience not as seditious rebellion, but as critical intelligence pertinent to the Imperium's own security and operational effectiveness. He articulated the inherent productivity deficits plaguing slave-based manufacturing systems, highlighting how a workforce devoid of incentive could neither innovate nor refine processes. He further illuminated the profound security vulnerabilities spawned by confining vast populations of resentful forced laborers within the very shadow of strategic imperial installations. Most pivotally, can introduce compelling evidence that many of the Imperium's most potentially valuable citizens harbored deep-seated memories of pre-imperial liberty, a resource that, if properly cultivated rather than brutally suppressed, could yield untold benefits. Administrator Chen listened intently, a spark of genuine engagement igniting in her weary eyes, an emotion I doubted she had experienced in years. "Are you suggesting that escaped slaves should be regarded as defectors rather than stolen property?" she inquired, her voice cutting through the suddenly charged air. "I am suggesting that individuals who demonstrate initiative, resourcefulness, and specialized knowledge could prove far more valuable as voluntary citizens than as coerced laborers," Kin clarified. This was a profoundly radical proposition, one that directly challenged the foundational tenets of imperial resource management. Yet, its inherent pragmatism possessed an undeniable allure for an administrator whose career trajectory depended entirely on her ability to devise efficient solutions to intractable problems. "What precisely are you proposing?" Chen pressed, her gaze fixed on Kin. Kin glanced at Yorick and me, Then back to the administrator. I propose these individuals be granted provisional citizenship status with assignments tailored to utilize their unique skills, thereby allowing them the freedom to contribute voluntarily to Imperial objectives. That is not possible under current regulations, Chen stated, her tone flat. Then perhaps the regulations require modification, Qin countered, his words hanging in the tense silence like a gauntlet thrown before the entire edifice of imperial governance. Remarkably, instead of an immediate dismissal, Chen reclined in her chair. She considered his audacious suggestion with the meticulous attention of someone long adept at navigating bureaucratic labyrinths with creative ingenuity. The legal complexities would be substantial, she conceded at last. Questions of ownership, compensation for lost property, and the precedent-setting implications for slave populations across the entire sector would be immense. Yes, Qin agreed, his voice firm, but the potential benefits, I believe, might well justify those complexities. Imagine the immense propaganda value of publicly demonstrating imperial mercy and justice. Envision the invaluable intelligence opportunities presented by the voluntary cooperation of individuals with detailed, first-hand knowledge of underground manufacturing operations. Consider, too, the exponential productivity gains achievable when workers possess a genuine, personal motivation to excel. Chen then shifted her piercing gaze to Yorick and me. And what do you propose to offer the Imperium in exchange for this unprecedented consideration? Yorick responded without a moment's hesitation. Everything we know about the slave operations beneath this hive, names, locations, security procedures, production capabilities, information that could help the Imperium transition to more efficient systems while simultaneously bolstering security and productivity. And after that, we ask only for the opportunity to prove that free people serve the Emperor more effectively than slaves ever could. It was an audaciously bold offer, one that instantly transformed us from mere escaped property into potential invaluable assets. More profoundly, it was a living demonstration of something the imperial system rarely, if ever, encountered. People choosing to serve, not under duress, but out of a genuine belief in the possibility of a better way of life. Chen studied us for a protracted moment, her expression an enigmatic mask. Then, with a quiet authority that commanded absolute attention, she activated her comm unit. I am declaring this a special administrative situation under Emergency Protocol 12. I want full documentation of every piece of intelligence these individuals can provide about underground operations, and I require a complete analysis of the feasibility of implementing voluntary labor programs within high-security manufacturing facilities. Her eyes met ours directly for the first time since we had entered her office, a subtle shift in her demeanor. You will remain in protective custody while this analysis is conducted, not as prisoners, but as imperial citizens under administrative review. If your information proves valuable and your proposals feasible, you may well discover that the Imperium is far more adaptable than you ever believed. And if not, I dared to ask, then you will have lived as free people for a few more days than you otherwise would have, she replied, a hint of something unreadable in her tone. Sometimes that is all anyone can ask for. We were escorted to quarters within the administrative complex that defied anything I had ever known. A modest room, yes, but one graced by an actual window that offered a panoramic view of the bustling landing platforms below, where starships arrived and departed, ferrying people to destinations spanning the galaxy. There was a bed with crisp, clean sheets, access to a shower with water that ran blessedly hot, and food prepared with a focus on taste, not merely nutritional necessity. But more than these novel physical comforts, what truly overwhelmed me was the profound silence. For the very first time in my life, I experienced the utter absence of industrial noise. No ceaseless grinding of machinery, no shrill klaxons marking shift changes, no constant grating reminder that every moment of my existence belonged to someone else. Here, I could think my own thoughts, uninterrupted. I could choose when to sleep, when to awaken, when to eat. The freedom was so absolute, it was almost disorienting, even frightening. Yorick, perhaps because his memories stretched back to a time before enslavement, adapted more swiftly than I did. He immersed himself in collaboration with Imperial analysts, meticulously sharing every detail he possessed regarding manufacturing systems, concurrently developing intricate proposals for transitional programs designed to gradually replace slave labor with voluntary service. My assignment, however, was different. Administrator Chen had personally requested that I document my own lived experience of slavery and escape, not for bureaucratic record-keeping, but for what she termed psychological analysis of imperial resource management efficiency. Writing was a skill I had never been taught, but speaking was something I could do. Hour after hour, I sat in a small, quiet office, my voice narrating my memories into recording devices that would preserve them for extensive analysis and distribution. I spoke of the nascent dreams that had first awakened me to the possibility of a different life. I recounted the transformative moment when I first witnessed sunlight, the breathtaking vastness of the open sky, the simple, profound miracle of choosing my own path. But I also spoke with a heavy heart of the cost, the countless other slaves who remained trapped in the perpetual darkness, never afforded the chance to reclaim their humanity. I detailed the dehumanizing system that reduced living beings to mere components in a gargantuan machine of production and consumption, and the crushing weight of knowing that my own freedom had come at the price of leaving behind those who deserved the same opportunity. These recordings would eventually become an integral part of something far grander than either Yorick or I could have ever conceived. Administrator Chen, meticulously cultivating her network of contacts throughout the labyrinthine imperial bureaucracy, had begun to construct a formidable case for the systematic reform of slave-based manufacturing. Her arguments were not rooted in humanitarian concerns, which typically held scant sway in imperial decision-making, but rather in the purely pragmatic imperatives of efficiency, security, and optimal resource utilization. Our individual escape had, against all odds, become the unexpected catalyst for a sector-wide conversation about whether the Imperium could truly afford to continue treating its own people as disposable resources. It was a dialogue that would undoubtedly span years to resolve, one destined to encounter fierce resistance from entrenched interests and long-established procedures. Yet, it was undeniably happening, and that was more than I had ever dared to hope for. 3 months after our escape, we received our answer. Yorick and I were summoned back to Administrator Chen's office, where we found her poring over a thick folder of documents, each emblazoned with official imperial seals. Her expression remained carefully neutral, yet in the depths of her tired eyes, I thought I detected a flicker of something akin to satisfaction. Your provisional status has been reviewed and approved by the sector administration, she announced, her voice resonating with quiet finality. You are hereby granted full Imperial citizenship, with all associated rights and responsibilities. The words should have filled me with unadulterated joy, but instead I felt a strange, bittersweet fusion of profound gratitude and lingering grief. We had won our personal freedom, yes, but that victory felt profoundly incomplete, while so many others languished in bondage. What about the others? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The slaves still working in the manufactorums? Change is slow within the Imperium, Chen replied, her gaze softening almost imperceptibly. But change is possible. Your information has directly led to the establishment of 3 pilot programs for transitional labor systems in manufacturing facilities across the sector. If successful, they may very well be expanded. It was not everything I had yearned for, but it was, undeniably, a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings were all that anyone could genuinely ask for. Jorik was assigned a position within the Imperial Manufacturing Authority, where his unparalleled knowledge of both slave and free production systems proved invaluable in designing innovative approaches to industrial organization. I was presented with a choice of several positions, but one in particular resonated deeply within me. An unexpected calling. I requested assignment as a counselor for refugees and displaced persons arriving at Imperial spaceports. These were people who, much like us, had been violently torn from their original lives and were now forced to navigate intricate systems they scarcely understood. They needed someone who could remind them that they were more than the harrowing circumstances that had brought them to Imperial attention. My first assignment involved assisting a group of survivors from a Hive world utterly devastated by an Orcish invasion. They arrived broken and profoundly traumatized, carrying nothing but the tattered clothes on their backs and the indelible memories of everything they had lost. As I worked tirelessly with them, helping them comprehend their bewildering options and nascent opportunities within Imperial society, my thoughts frequently returned to the delicate metal leaf that I still carried amongst my personal effects. It had evolved into a powerful symbol, not merely of beauty flourishing amidst ugliness, but of the intrinsic human capacity to forge meaning from the raw, often brutal, materials of existence. Every person I encountered carried their own unique version of that leaf, some cherished memory, some latent skill, some resilient dream that had miraculously survived the cataclysmic destruction of everything familiar. My new purpose was to help them recognize those inner resources and, crucially, to guide them in transforming these remnants into new possibilities for their lives. It was work imbued with meaning far beyond mere survival, a purpose extending beyond simple obedience. It was the kind of work that could only be truly fulfilled by someone who actively chose to do it, someone who found profound value in the act of service itself, rather than in any anticipated rewards or feared punishments. Years unfurled. The pilot programs, though slow, gradually expanded, frequently encountering resistance and setbacks, yet steadily gaining ground through the undeniable demonstration of their practical benefits. More enslaved individuals were granted the opportunity to transition to voluntary service. More administrators, spurred by the evidence, began to critically question the efficiency of systems built upon coercion rather than willing cooperation. And always, in quiet, reflective moments, my thoughts drifted to Verdania. I never did reach the verdant world of Jorik's memories. I never saw the sprawling orchards and flowing rivers he had so vividly described. But in time, I came to grasp that Verdania was not merely a physical place. It was a state of being, an intrinsic way of relating to existence that profoundly valued human dignity and the boundless possibility of choice. I found my own version of Verdania in the meaningful work I performed, in the countless people I helped, in the myriad small acts of kindness and recognition that served to remind both them and me that we were indeed more than the sum of our circumstances. Sometimes, late at night, when the vast spaceport finally quieted, I would stand at my window and gaze up at the distant stars. Somewhere among them lay the world where Jorik had been born, where ancient apple trees still grew in orchards lovingly tended by people who freely chose their own paths. Somewhere among them were thousands of other worlds, each harboring its own unique versions of beauty and possibility. And somewhere, deep in the darkness, beneath Hive cities, across the galaxy, people were dreaming dreams. Dreams that might one day lead them to remember their own forgotten humanity. The metal leaf still rests on my desk, a silent, enduring reminder that even in the deepest, most oppressive darkness, human beings remain exquisitely capable of creating something beautiful. It stands as a powerful testament to the fundamental truth that Jorik had imparted to me during those desperate hours when we first dared to dream of freedom. We are more than what they tell us we are. We are more than the restrictive roles assigned to us, more than the predefined functions we are expected to perform, more than the suffocating limitations imposed by systems built on fear and control. We are human beings, endowed with all the terrible and wonderful possibilities that implies. We are capable of choice, even when that choice seems utterly impossible. We are capable of hope, even in the bleakest face of despair. We are capable of love, even when surrounded by the most virulent hatred. And sometimes, if we are incredibly fortunate, we are capable of transformation, not just of ourselves, but of the very world around us. One choice at a time, one act of courage at a time, one moment of recognition at a time. The dream of freedom is not merely about escaping physical chains. It is about the profound act of remembering that those chains, however strong and immutable they may appear, are not the ultimate truth about human existence. The final truth is indelibly written in the sacred space between one heartbeat and the next, where we, as individuals, discover that we possess the inherent power to choose who we will become. This is my testimony, recorded for those who might one day need reminding. We began as slaves, but we did not end as slaves. We chose to become something else, something more, something truly worthy of the dreams that had sustained us through the darkest hours of our captivity. And in making that profound choice, we discovered that freedom is not a distant destination to be finally reached, but rather a conscious way of walking through whatever world we find ourselves in. It is the metal leaf hidden against the heart. It is the cherished memory of sunlight on skin that has known only artificial light. It is the unwavering voice that speaks truth, even when truth is dangerous. It is the singular moment when we cease asking permission to be human and simply choose to be.